and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who had said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. And as they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it was almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had made known to them, how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. The word of the Lord. You ever go on a road trip with your family? Especially when you were young, your parents would cram everybody into the car, or, my generation with station wagons, and you headed off to some place you'd never been before, and everything is new and exciting because you've never been there before. Well, I remember one such trip with my family here in Florida. We were driving along, and we saw some roadside store, and nowadays I'd describe it as a tourist trap. Had a big sign outside, said, "All the orange juice you can drink for 10 cents. So my family stopped, and I went straight to the orange juice counter with my shiny dime, expecting to get a tall glass of chilled orange juice. And what I got was a little paper cup that was smaller than the cups we use for communion. Wasn't very filling. And after my third glass, I asked the guy behind the counter for one more, and he scoffed. He said, "You want more?" Before he finally filled the cup up almost all the way with just pulp. I was disappointed in that stop. It wasn't what I expected. The promise of unlimited orange juice had been broken. Have you ever had a promise made to you that was broken? Traveling and promises. That's what today's gospel lesson is about. There are a lot of journeys, a lot of travels in the Bible, and a lot that involve Jesus. Starts off with a journey with Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem. The road is the setting for the parable of the Good Samaritan. A road leads the prodigal son back to his father. Jesus sets his eyes toward Jerusalem and travels there until his crucifixion. The roads continue in the book of Acts, for instance, when Paul encounters God on the road to Damascus, and his life is changed forever. There's something about roads, the way roads bring us together, the way roads can pose a danger to us all, and the way roads can become a symbol of faith, a faith on the move. As I mentioned earlier, I had a friend from high school. She was really bright. She's still with us. She is really bright. She ended up going to Yale and then went to Vanderbilt Med School, and now she is a psychiatrist. She did her training in Seattle, and now she's in Tennessee. And back in high school, she said, all the roads are related. I said, what in the world do you mean? She said, no road just sits there on its own. It's attached to some other road. And all the roads are attached to all the other roads. You can go anywhere in this country just by making a series of right turns and left turns. I hadn't really thought about that before. And I think people are like that too. Our journeys can all intersect with one another. And they can have unexpected turns along the way. In today's gospel lesson, we have these two disciples who are on the road to Emmaus following Jesus' crucifixion. The story is a wonder, an irony, a misunderstanding, a drama that at the end has a big reveal. It's a powerful story. And it weaves together friendship, hospitality, faithfulness, discipleship. The scene on this road sets the tone for the early church. It will be a church on the move, sent out by Jesus, who walks alongside us, even when we don't recognize him and we don't think he's there. Let's take a closer look. The scene takes place on the same day the women discover the empty tomb. So here are the two disciples. They're walking, leaving Jerusalem, making the 7-mile walk to Emmaus. Why are they leaving Jerusalem? Are they in fear for their lives now that Jesus has been executed? Are they leaving because the promise of Jesus was not fulfilled? We're not sure. What we do know is that this road was a road of disappointment for them and broken dreams. This is the road of regrets and questions and uncertain futures. They're hoping just to make sense of what had happened. So Cleopas and his companion are talking to each other. Could it really have only been 1 week since they had stood with the crowds in the street, waving palm fronds and cheering? And it seemed like finally the whole world was beginning to recognize what they had already known, that Jesus was the true king, the one who would fix everything. But instead, only a few days later, they watched from their hiding places as Jesus was nailed to a cross and executed by the state close to the city dump. What kind of king was that? What kind of Messiah? They're thinking they must have been wrong. He had been an inspiring preacher, an insightful teacher, a good friend, but he must not have been the one that they had been waiting for after all. As they talk to each other about these things, a stranger appears to them. He asks what Cleopas and his friends are talking about and why all the heavy sighs, why all the sad looks. Looking a bit shocked, they tell him the story. I mean, who doesn't know what's been happening in Jerusalem these last few days? It's all over the news. It was a trending topic on Twitter. They tell the story about how they'd hoped Jesus was the one, but how they must have been mistaken. They'd heard rumors that his tomb had been found empty, that an angel had appeared that said he was alive, but they hadn't seen it for themselves. They had heard it from Mary. And can you really trust a woman? Now, at the time, the courts would not accept testimony from a woman. They were notoriously unreliable witnesses. But then the stranger does the most remarkable thing. He begins telling the story of Jesus back to Cleopas and his friend. But this time, the story starts way back at the beginning of Scripture and continues through the prophets and the Proverbs. And they listen to these strangers' words. And those defeated disciples begin to feel hope. As they approach their destination, the two disciples notice that this guy seems to plan to keep walking. Where he was going, we don't know, but he was traveling on a road. So as they get close to their destination, Cleopas and his friend invite the stranger to come in, eat with them. But when they sit down at the table, all of a sudden the stranger acts like he's the host of the meal. He picks up the bread as if he made it himself, and then he blesses it, and he breaks it, and he shares it. It was as if this was his table and his meal. And as they reach out to receive the bread, Cleopas and his companion finally see who this stranger was. It was Jesus. This was no roadside orange juice stand. The promises had not been broken. And when Jesus does this, most Jesus thing of all, everything changes. After the resurrection, the disciples' relationship with Jesus changed. He wasn't as easily recognized, but the things that made him recognizable to them were the things that had always been true about who he was. Through Scripture, the breaking of bread, the hospitality shown to a stranger. I have to think, maybe this is just how Jesus always shows up, even today. In the midst of our ordinary lives, we are walking on roads. In the faces of neighbors or strangers, people we meet along the way. Maybe at home, just getting ready for supper. When we read the Bible, when we discuss it, when we share a meal, when we invite someone to join us in fellowship. If we want to experience Jesus, we don't need to position ourselves in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. We simply need to pay attention. For the risen Lord is among us, moving and speaking and working, even here and even now. Even when it's hard for us to recognize him. Even when we've gotten it all wrong, Jesus keeps walking beside us, meeting us on whatever road we're on. He asks us, what's going on? And then begins to tell our story back to us with a whole new ending. In our hearts, he puts hope that we thought we may have lost forever. And all of a sudden, we realize Jesus has been with us all along. In the name of the Father, and the Son,